Again, and welcome to all of you who are here in person and via live stream for this, I think, really important and timely conversation. As I was saying, this is a topic that is quite personal to me. It's deeply, deeply meaningful because faith has played an important part in my life, and probably for many of you here, and certainly those on the panel. It's not only shaped my personal values, but also how I understand service and my responsibility to others and to the broader community. At its best, faith challenges us to live with humility and with purpose. It can deepen our empathy, it can widen our perspective, and it can call us to act in service to something that is larger than ourselves. And yet, religion's role in public life has never been simple. I think we can all look at the long arc of history and see that. It's woven into the fabric of our democracy, not only through institutions, but also through individual lives and commitments. At a time when polarization threatens the bonds of civic trust, conversations like this one really matter. So again, thank you for being here. These conversations remind us that the work of democracy isn't only in our systems and our institutions and structures, it's also about our culture, the relationships and the beliefs that shape the way that we live and lead our lives and lead and work together. I'm especially grateful that we're joined today by voices who bring a deep experience and clarity to this conversation. And I'm delighted to introduce the person who's going to lead us through this conversation, my friend and colleague, Louis Nelson. Many of you probably know Louis already. He needs no introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway because I have the joy and privilege of doing that. Louis is UEA's Vice Provost for Academic Outreach and a champion for public service and civic engagement across the entire university. He's also a distinguished scholar of architectural history whose work helps us see the legacies of the past in the spaces that we inhabit today. From documenting the transatlantic slave trade to exploring the built environment of democracy, Louis brings a thoughtful and grounded approach to complex issues. We're fortunate to have him guide today's conversation. And with that, Louis, I am delighted to turn this over to you. Thank you.
It's always an honor to say yes to Melody, and a delight to be here. When I was initially invited to moderate this panel, my immediate reaction was yes. This is a conversation we need to have, and I absolutely wish to be at the table. So thank you all so much for joining us today for our conversation. And allow me just a moment to offer some opening remarks, and then I'll introduce our three panelists for today. So good morning. It's a real honor to be with you all this morning and to moderate this conversation that speaks so powerfully to the challenges and the possibilities of democracy. Today, we turn our attention to the intersection of religion and democracy, two forces that shape not only our institutions, but also the way we live alongside one another. Faith can inspire service, create bonds of solidarity, hold up a vision of justice that transcends the moment. It can also be a source of tension in pluralistic societies, raising difficult questions about religious diversity and belonging. So what does it mean to practice faith in a democracy that depends on both conviction and compromise? How do we hold space for religious commitments, while honoring also our shared civic life? How can interfaith efforts help us to meet challenges in a pluralistic society? We're fortunate to be joined today by three people who have spent their careers engaging exactly these questions. Their full bios are available on the Karsh Institute website, but I'm going to offer them in brief here. Huranessa Faryat is a Muslim American community leader and a passionate advocate for multi-faith collaboration. She is the president of Faryat LLC and the founder and music director of the Adams Beach Choir, the first Masjid youth choir in the United States. She previously served as the director of outreach for the Multi-Faith Network, Neighbors Network, and currently serves on the boards of the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy and for Women for Afghan Women. A former child refugee from Afghanistan, She has participated in interfaith policy discussions at the White House, the Department of Health and Human Services, under both recent administrations. So glad to have you with us. Rabbi Noam Marantz is the Director of Interreligious Affairs at the American Jewish Committee, where he leads global interfaith outreach and advocacy. He has expanded the committee's engagement with Muslim, Latino evangelical, and Latter-day Saint communities. Rabbi Marantz has served as the chair of the International Jewish Committee for Interreligious Consultations, the official Jewish dialogue partner with the Vatican, the Ecumenical Patriarchate, and the World Council of Churches, and the World Evangelical Alliance. Lots of relationships to manage. Before joining the American Jewish Committee in 2001, he served as the rabbi of Temple Israel in New Jersey for 16 years. So he knows work on the ground as well. Reverend Gabriel Selbero is the pastor of The Gathering Place, a Latino-led multi-ethnic Assemblies of God congregation in Orlando, Florida. He is also the founder and president of the National Latino Evangelical Coalition, a national network of several thousand evangelical congregations. Reverend Salguero has served as the White House Faith-Based Advisory Council and the National Advisory Council of My Brother's Keepers Alliance. He currently serves on the advisory board of the Karsh Institute of Democracy right here at home. He's widely recognized as one of the nation's leading evangelical voices and has written and spoken extensively on Latino evangelicalism and multicultural congregations. So please join me in welcoming all three of our amazing panels. So I have the honor of launching our discussion, and I've got a series of questions that we'll be sort of marching through. But I'd like to begin by asking a bit of an Uber question, and I'm going to sort of frame it individually for each of you. The first question is this: how can faith communities uphold their core beliefs while also embracing pluralism and coexistence? And in so doing, help sustain democratic values like tolerance, mutual respect, and the pursuit of justice. And Harun Asad, if I may, we talked beforehand. I am deeply taken by the capacity of religious leaders as stewards of ancient wisdom to share that ancient wisdom in the shaping of democratic practices. And so I'd love you to speak a little bit to that question, to that frame as well. And we also talked a little bit about the ways the arts. You're the leader of this remarkable music initiative. How can religious communities actually lead democratic processes through collaborative projects like yours?
Thank you so much.
Wherever you want.
I appreciate it. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. I want to thank everyone here at the center for having this engagement and for inviting me here today. It's really an honor to only have to drive 2 hours and 15 minutes. So to let them not have to take a flight over. A beautiful campus, first time I'm here. So thank you so much for having me. I wanted to start that question, with us going back in history a little bit. If we look at how Islam came to the world with our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we get to see a different light of movement, a way of life where the Prophet Muhammad enforced this rule on everyone in Medina specifically that promoted religious freedom. And the Charter of Medina, if you ever get a chance to look it up, which he put together, was a key component of religious freedom. It's the first of its kind ever. And this was something that was perpetuated in Medina, protecting the Jewish community and other minorities in Medina. And if we look at that in comparison to today in the world that we live in, sometimes it's really hard to see people of different backgrounds being able to live together. But there's so many historical events that have happened that have brought people together. And Islam plays such a huge role in that. And I always say this as a joke, people take their faith and they put in democracy and they put in the idea of pluralism and living together in multi-faith engagement. But for us as Muslims, it's actually part of our faith. So when we're doing it, we're actually worshiping God. So it's second nature for us. It's actually part of our religion to be able to protect the Jewish community, the Christian community, the Baha'i community, even those who don't believe. It is actually part of our faith. So it's inculcated in who we are as Muslims. And that's why throughout history, you will see when the Muslims were in charge or they were ruling certain areas, the minorities were protected. If they weren't, it's maybe because of correction and people not understanding the rule of what Islam actually promotes. But Islam in and of itself is so keen in making sure that everyone living under its rule is protected. And that's something that really draws me in as a Muslim, because sometimes when we are born into a religion, you just go with it. But when I've done my research and I've looked at history and I've looked at what Islam is actually promoting, I really get to see something that I love, that my religion is promoting this from over 1400 years ago. And scholars and teachers and my own teachers have been promoted this for such a long time that sitting together with one another, even when we don't agree, we're not going to agree on everything. So, we don't need to sugarcoat it. We're not. But the humanity that we're supposed to have for one another is always going to be there. And that's something that we have to work on, because you cannot really have democracy if your humanity is lost. Connecting that back to my choir, it's odd because music really isn't part of our worship in our masjids. And I went to a performing arts high school in Queens, New York City. That's where I grew up. And when Imam Majid found out that I have a background, he said, well, you're going to start a choir. And I looked at him and I laughed, because it's such an odd thing for an imam of a masjid to say, because a lot of scholars do believe that it's a sin to bring music in and all of this other stuff. And here's an imam telling me that I have to start a choir. And so I told her, I'm a trained vocalist, not a conductor. And he said, just do that. It's not that simple. But we started in 2016 and we're going strong. We just had our 9th anniversary. And this choir, I actually thought we were just going to sing at 1 or 2 events at the Adams Center, which is the masjid that we're part of in Northern Virginia. But these kids are invited to churches, to synagogues, to different temples of different faiths, and they really get exposed to people of different faith groups. And that's what I love. I love that these kids get to go into a Friday Shabbat service, and they're sitting and they're learning about the process, and they're paying their respect to everyone in the room. Or they get to go to Sunday Mass and service and get to listen to what the preacher is saying. And then they'll come back and talk to me about similarities or differences. But just engaging at that age is so important. I really never thought that a choir would be exposed to that. But it's actually an amazing way to get children involved in multi-faith peacekeeping at a very young age through a fun activity. Because if you tell them there's going to be a lecture, no one's going to come. But if you tell them there's going to be music, you're going to sing, and there's going to be cookies, they will all come.
Fantastic answer. Thank you very much. Noam, I'd like to pivot to you. You are the steward of the most ancient wisdom represented here today. And I wonder if you might speak a little bit in answering this question to the intersection of both curiosity and courage. I've done my homework and watched a number of podcasts and read content from all of our panelists today. And you have this sort of remarkable biography of having pivoted into from experiencing from within a majority context into a minority context. And I wonder if you might pull on that thread a little bit as you think about both the way you preach and lead, but also the way you model at this intersection of both curiosity and courage.
Thank you. What a pleasure to be here at UVA and with Karsh and with my dear friends, Horanessa and Gabriel, and my new friends here at Karsh and at UVA. The adjective you left out was insular. I actually grew up in an insular Jewish community and had very few interreligious interactions. Went to Jewish schools my whole life, Jewish camps, lived in a Jewish neighborhood. And then by the time I finished rabbinical school, I was placed in a typical American town, which at the time had no mosques yet, had one synagogue and about 20 churches. And part of my job was being representative of the Jewish people in those venues. And it didn't take so much courage, but it involved a lot of curiosity about the other. And I'll get to that in a second, but I want to say a word about the Jewish tradition and how it mandates, both implicitly and explicitly, that experience. I think first and foremost, Judaism, to quote Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, the late Chief Rabbi Sachs, believes in the dignity of difference. We believe, as it says in Genesis, that we are all created in the image of God. And the rabbis understand that to mean that everyone has infinite worth, but no one is the same. So there's an unlimited number of expressions of God's divinity walking on earth. What a great opportunity for all of us. And in addition to that, we understand our particularism pretty much primarily in service of universalism. In other words, it's very important to have group identity and to have what may be more parochial beliefs, concentric circles of family. I think we can all agree that religion's ultimate goal needs not only to address our relationship with God, and not only to sustain our group identity, however you define that, but also to be in service of wider humanity. When God is about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, he says, I need to consult with Abraham about these people whom he doesn't know because I'm about to destroy their city. And God says, I need to test Abraham at this moment to see whether he's going to lead his people in a path of righteousness and justice. And God says, Abraham says to God, Hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat? Can the judge of all the earth, God, not act justly? And Abraham there was role modeling that we can be in our smaller communities, but we have to be outward looking toward the world. And it really was personally the curiosity. I felt like a kid at a candy store, learning about other people's traditions. It said that I'm representing the oldest tradition here on the panelists' presentations, but the truth is, I live among a very small people, 16, 17 million, in a sea of Christians and Muslims. And I learn more about my tradition by knowing more about Christianity and Islam. I learn about the dignity of difference. And that is not only good, I think, for the Jewish people and humanity, but in a very selfish way for me as an individual.
Such wisdom. Thank you. Pastor Gay, if we can pitch to you, you have a podcast in which you unpack this really interesting framework around false peace. And I'd like to ask you to unpack a little bit of that for us as you're thinking about this relationship between religion, religious practices, and the communities you shepherd. What does your tradition have to say about false peace, and how do you lead your congregations and other congregations towards more complex understanding of whatever the opposite of false peace is?
Well, thank you. And thanks to UVA and Karsh Institute and my friends, Peronessa and Noel, who've been on probably a couple panels together. And every time I hear them, I think I get wiser. So thank you for that. And thank you for hosting. Well, so I am a Latino Pentecostal. Pentecostal is a category of evangelicalism. Some might say a different category. Some might say a subcategory. There are many debates about that. No one has won yet. I think this dialectic of justice and democracy, I really look at it from the teachings of Jesus, and picking up from what Noam and others have said is, you can have deep conviction without abandoning civility. And so conviction and civility are not antonyms. At their best, they're complementary. You can, as the New Testament says, drink deeply from your own wells while looking at the wells of other men and women and learning from them. And so one of the challenges that we have when we look at democracy, so even Pentecostalism, modern Pentecostalism is only 100 years old compared to other strands of Christianity, right? The Great Reformation, Luther and Zwingli and Calvin. We're a baby. We're talking 500, 600 years compared to Judaism and Islam. My goodness. So we are unpacking what is the richness of our tradition that speaks to how you live in a religiously pluralistic society or pluralistic society writ large while holding deeply to your deepest convictions. I think the teachings of Jesus are instructive of this. And I'm going to use Luke, Dr. Luke's position of it. Luke Acts, right? Most people said that Dr. Luke wrote Acts. And Luke picks up on the Hebrew tradition of the protected classes, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, the poor, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and the poor. They're protected classes in Jewish tradition. And Jesus, in these teachings, picks up on this. In seminary, they said to us, Luke is the gospel of the protected classes, the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and the poor. And I'm Pentecostal. Pentecost begins with this kind of understanding of there's a gathering, Acts chapter 2, de toda tribu, nación, de la diáspora, llegaron a Jerusalén para celebrar a Pentecostés, de Bitinia, de Capadocia, de Egipto. And so even in the birth of the original Pentecostal movement, there is a returned diaspora, right? So the church begins with an understanding of diversity and an understanding of if we are to be united but not uniform, there has to be justice. For something to be genuinely democratic, it has to be just. And oftentimes the tension becomes, we want justice for our group. And we want protection for our group. Not understanding that at the very birth of the church, Dr. Luke says it in Acts chapter 2, says, is the miracle of Pentecost is not, with all respect to my Pentecostal sisters and brothers, of which I'm one, that they spoke other tongues. That's not really the miracle. The miracle of it was that they all heard them speak. And so in the birth of the church, there's an empathetic listening that leads to justice. It's not in the speaking that there's the power of this growth. It's in the listening. And part of an essential ingredient to justice is listening. Shema Israel, hear. And I think one of the challenges that we face in democracy is that we have this false piece that democracy is homogenization, that we all have to think alike, that we all have to walk in the same direction. And if anything Pentecost taught us is that it's always been this kind of plurality where we learn to listen to one another in a way that helps us walk together, even when we think differently. And I think that kind of ingredient of the early church is being challenged in late modernity or postmodernity, which is how do we listen with conviction and civility in ways that lead to justice. And so, borrowing from one of the great prophets, God has told us, O more, what is good and what God requires of us, to do justice, to love mercy, y caminar humildemente delante de Dios, and walk humbly before your God. And so I think that in our tribe, one of the things we're trying to navigate is, hey, we believe, we have deep convictions, we don't want to abandon them, but how do we embrace a democracy that's not just the privilege of my worldview, but listens to others in a way that treats them justly and makes me walk humbly?
We can end right now, and I'm really happy. Thank you, all three, with such rich wisdom for our current moment. I'm really, really grateful for the voice you offer to our communities at Buckle School. Thank you. One of the factors that we navigate at the intersection of religion and democracy are institutions. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the role of institutions next. Noam, I think I'm going to ask you to speak first to this particular question. Institutions play a crucial role in shaping and sustaining democratic culture. Their resilience is deeply tied to our broader social and civic values. Take, for example, the Supreme Court, one of our democracy's most influential institutions, which has had a number of rulings of late around the role of religion in the public sphere. What are your thoughts on how some of these recent rulings from the court have both shaped and reflected the evolving role of religion in American public life?
Thank you. Thank you from my colleagues again for wonderful quotes from our scriptures. Appreciate it. The Supreme Court has played an enormous role in shaping the place of religion in American life, more than most people understand. And I think that the Supreme Court is playing a major role right now in America, because we are living in a time of great division. And the Supreme Court is going to play an increasing role in how that division plays out. Or at least we're hoping that the Supreme Court plays a pivotal role in how that division plays out. And of course, the conventional wisdom is that the Supreme Court interprets law. But there's a certain hermeneutic to that interpretation of law. It has never been completely divorced from historical trends and historical evolutions. One could cite many examples in which perhaps the simple reading of a law was interpreted in a surprising way. So the Supreme Court has had a special responsibility in moving America in a particular direction, hopefully in a direction of progress. We're here in Charlottesville, not home, but maybe depository of all men are created equal. And what that has come to mean over time. It doesn't mean anymore what it meant when it was written by Thomas Jefferson and signed by our founding fathers, obviously. It didn't include enslaved men. It didn't include women. Interestingly, it included, very early on, all faith expressions, also thanks to Thomas Jefferson in the early 19th century. And what happened here in Virginia, which I'm increasingly thinking is the seam line of America, where the transition from the North to the South and the assuring that we all can live together. Supreme Court, they have ruled on so many things. Religion in the public square, reproductive rights, accommodation for religion in the workplace. For a minority community like the Jewish people, I know sometimes people don't always relate to the Jewish people as a minority. But statistically, of course, we are. We're only about 2% of the population of the United States. And the Supreme Court has played an essential role in protecting the rights of minorities and interpreting how that First Amendment is going to be explicated and implemented. How we can both be arguably the most religious country in the Western world and still be famous for our separation of church and state. Maybe that's how you become the most religious country in the Western world, by separating church and state so that it's the spirit of voluntarism that is there. So without getting into every single recent decision of the Supreme Court, I think it's quite obvious that the Supreme Court's decisions are not only going to have an impact on America, but on religion in America, because they will shape the contours of what is allowed in that interaction that I spoke about earlier of particularism in service of universalism. I hope that the Supreme Court continues in the tradition of protecting the right of particularism as long as it doesn't trample on the rights of another, and that it's in the greater service of universalism. The most challenging discussions in the country right now were over women's reproductive rights. This has a lot of meaning in the religious context. It's where there is great difference between religious groups, between Jews and Christians, between Jews and others. And we don't normally look at it that way, but those kinds of decisions shape the religious discourse in this country. And the Supreme Court needs to model how that can be done in a way that Gabriel introduced a moment ago. How we can have difference of opinion in a civilized way, in a non-divisive way, in a not zero-sum game way. Zero-sum game is not good for the Jewish people, and I hope you can agree is not good for America. This is not we win, they lose. It's us figuring out how to move forward together.
Okay, do you want to follow that? You will come to for this.
There's a lot there. I think when you're talking about individualism and universalism, probably my favorite U.S. theologian, not my favorite theologian, but my favorite U.S. theologian, is Reinhold Niebuhr. And Niebuhr often talks about one of the gifts of Christian theology is that it embraces the paradox that we humans, are capable of great sin. We need the law to kind of curtail that, Dr. King would tell us. But also, we're capable of great self-transcendence, great humanity. And I think the Supreme Court, trying to navigate that tension that we've heard here between individualism or the protection of numerical minorities, religious minorities writ large, that list is long, and kind of our shared union. It's a challenge. I serve predominantly immigrant communities. And there's been quite a number of cases, and to repeat several more, from dealing with refugees, dealing with immigrants, dealing with houses of worship, serving immigrant communities, and that brings the reality of religious liberty vis-a-vis respect for state and federal laws. Those things are not easy. I'm reminded of this kind of, I was talking to my son, he was at Sorbonne College at UPenn, and he's taking this course on law and society. And there's this Supreme Court case, 1938, called the Caroline Products thing, which is like, I'm like, why is he reading this? It's about interstate commerce of Phil DeMeck. Right? I'm like, okay. But it's got the most famous footnote in Supreme Court history, which is footnote 4, where Justice Harlan and his law clerk talks about judicial review, strict review in this case, when minorities are at risk. There has to be a strict judicial review. And how do you balance the needs of the state or processes, and other kind of legal minds, which I am not one, talk about protecting not just that discrete minority, but their participation in democratic processes, from milk. And from that, there's a lot of civil rights law interpretation. There's a lot of, and actually nowadays some immigrant lawyers are talking about that footnote number 4 and how it applies to things like the 14th Amendment and the First Amendment. The tribe that I am a part of, evangelicalism, it's a very interesting moment, because if you're a Latino evangelical, you are both in the minority, this is Hispanic, but at the same time, you're part of a historically influential group, which is U.S. evangelicalism. So I am a brown person who serves overwhelmingly immigrant communities, 15 nationalities in the church I serve. Our coalition is about 3,000 churches or so. But in the larger conversation, I have seen as the dominant group because I belong to the evangelical. And so I have to navigate this reality when I hear the Supreme Court talk about religious liberty, and how the masterpiece, the baker, the coach who prayed on the field, all of these cases are going on. And people are like, are they the minority or are they the dominant group? And what happens when you are both? How do you ask the Supreme Court to navigate that nuance of the kind of 4th footnote about thin milk? That you protect minorities in the democratic process, but what happens when the numerical minority has disproportionate influence and power? This, I think, is in the next decade how many Christians who Christianity Today said they had a Chicken Little moment in the last decade when certain court cases were decided against them. There has to be a kind of conviction and humility that the Supreme Court, I don't think that 4th footnote has articulated clearly when there's a both and reality. And I think the future is going to have to become clearer for the justices on that and for our tradition.
Vanessa, you want to add?
It's a lot. I could say that as the only woman on this panel, as a woman a manel, right? I can say that it's really important for us to remember that there's a difference between religious freedom and promoting that, and then promoting the majority religious view on the rest of the United States. And if we look at the Supreme Court itself, it was established to do just that, right? To interpret law, make sure that it's fair for everyone. But we do see instances where a certain majority group, right, is dictating certain things. And we talked about women's reproductive rights. And I don't know. I think women know what they want. Women should be able to decide what's right for them based on their own values, based on their own morals, based on their religious interpretation of what that may be. Don't need a law to come down and tell women what they can and can't do with their bodies. And when that happens, it's a direct interpretation of a specific religious ruling. So for me as a Muslim woman, yes, we promote the sanctity of life. We have to protect life. But there are instances where abortion is allowed, and I'm not going to go into the detail of that. But if there's ruling saying that I can't do it, then that, of course, is able to just non-liberty for me, right? I can't do what my religion allows me to do based on a ruling that was based on a certain majority group's ruling through the Supreme Court. So we have to be very careful on what that really means, because there is a distinction between that. Yes, promote religious freedom, but that doesn't mean you get to promote and indoctrinate a certain specific religious viewpoint on the rest of us. And I hope that's clear for all of us, because that's where it gets really, really hazy. And I wanted to shift a little bit from the Supreme Court and just talk about the U.S. as an institution itself. If we look in the 1960s, when the civil rights movement was happening, a lot of people don't know that because of the collaboration that the Black community had, I, as an immigrant, came to this country. And it's on the backs of their work and their hard resistance to racism that I, as an Afghan refugee, came to this country. And those are the things we really have to build on. We have to look at things that have worked, where people have collaborated, where people have thought about others, not just themselves. If our democracy and our work is centered around, I only care about my people, the people who pray like me, the people who look like me, the people who see God like me, we're going to suffer. And we've seen that throughout history when communities have done that. They've never thrived. They've never had allies. They've been the lone wolf in the room because they've only advocated for themselves. And they didn't care that the things they were advocating for was actually impinging on the rights of others. Whether that's protesting, which is a key component of who we are as the United States, right? Why can't we protest in certain situations? Why can't we voice our opinions? That's part of democracy. And that is also tied into this map. To be able to say when you see something wrong and you feel something wrong, you should be able to go and protest. That's part of the dynamics of getting people to see what everybody on the ground is feeling and what they feel about a certain thing happening. What happens is when you shut off that conversation, when you shut off the concept of listening, right? We listen sometimes to respond, but we're supposed to listen to understand, right? And when you allow people to protest and talk about how they feel, it allows them to feel that they're heard. But when you shut them down, what ends up happening, and you've seen this throughout history, is revolutions start from underground. And they're usually violent, and they're usually destructive to society. So it's a way and a means to let people talk about how they feel and what they think about certain situations, and we need to be able to promote that. Is when we cut that off, we're actually alienating ourselves from everybody else, regardless of what that issue may be. Like I'm here speaking. If I hadn't come to the US, I might not have been alive, right? But I can sit and reflect on the fact that I am living in a country that is supposed to promote democracy, is supposed to promote justice. Well, what is justice? Who's justice for? Is it just for me? If it's just for me, then I'm the one.
I'd like to say that we're all better and stronger because of your voice. Thank you. Some good. Let's pivot to some audience Q&A. I think we're going to have some folks rooming with microphones. And so if you'll just put up your hand, I'll call on you. I'd like to offer two guidelines. The first is to ensure that your voice ends with a question mark. And so we will be tempted to pivot into monologue. I will encourage you to ask a direct question. And I'll also reserve the right to encourage you to get to your question. To just do a monologue. And so civil discourse gives me the opportunity to moderate our conversation. So I'll hold that right. And secondly, everyone in the room has the right to ask a question. And everyone on the panel has the right to answer those questions. And I will not tolerate silencing. And so I just want to be really clear that every question here is a welcome question. And every answer, it is also a welcome answer. So with those parameters and guidelines in place, I invite you to, oh my goodness, and from the front right, a courageous younger voice. Looking forward to your question.
Look, there's a mic coming, so if you mic, okay.
How do you think your faith affects your view on democracy?
Who would like to go first?
I think, great question. Thank you. First of all, I this may be a little bit, anyway, you gave me a green light, so here it goes. I think democracies are good. And I think there are virtues in our tradition, Christian virtues. Love is a virtue. Justice is a virtue, but mercy is a virtue. And so those virtues in our tradition inform how we name democracy. At the same time, my faith reminds me that every human institution is penultimate. And so it reminds me that everything lives, as Dr. Gardner Jenner would say, subspecies eternitatis, under the gaze of eternity. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says every judgment is penultimate. And so it pushes me to, if I'm a good citizen and I'm true to my faith, be mindful that our democracy is a work in progress. It's always working. It's imperfect. And so I think sometimes we have a stagnant view of democracy. We got it. I like the phrase, we're forming a more perfect union. It's happening. And my faith calls me to contribute from the place of the ultimate, from the place of my limited view of the ultimate, to say, this doesn't align with the deepest convictions of human dignity, of the imago Dei, of loving your neighbor as yourself. And so my faith says democracy should align itself with the deepest virtues, and at the same time, my faith calls me to critique democracy when it doesn't live up to the most transcendent values of true dignity.
I'd like to invite each of you actually to respond to this. I think this is a great question that deserves lots of response.
I want to quote a verse from the Quran, and I want to paraphrase, where God talks about justice. And he says, promote justice, advocate for justice, go after justice, even if it's against yourself. How many of us go to sleep at night and think, did I oppress anyone today? Did I violate anyone today? Did I stand up for anybody today? When I think about my faith and what it promotes for me to say something, do something, or hate it in my heart. And there's a hadith of the tradition of the Prophet where he says, if you see injustice, stop it with your hand. And if you can't stop it with your hand, say something about it. And if you can't say something about it, hate it in your heart. And that is the lowest form of faith. Right? So when I see documentaries on the Holocaust, I'm saddened. It's a horrible place to eat in this world at that time. When I see what's going on in Gaza, I'm saddened. When I see what's going on in Sudan, I am saddened. And if all of us here are not saddened by these images, there is something wrong with our humanity. There is something wrong with our democracy. Because at the end of the day, they're human beings that were put on this earth by our Creator. That if something is happening, we should be able to do something about it. If you can't do something, say something. And if you can't say something, hate it in your heart. So it's not just lip service. We have to move. We are responsible for the rest of the world. Right? We talk about democracy. We talk about being a superpower as the United States, but that comes with responsibility. And it comes with the responsibility of taking care of others and making sure they're protected. And this is such a key component in my faith, that I cannot walk down the street and watch someone get harassed who may be, let's say, Jewish, and they're being harassed by a Muslim, and I'm just going to be like, not my girl, right? Oh, it's a Muslim doing it. It's okay. No, I have to stop them. I have to physically go and say what you're doing is wrong. That's what's expected from me. And if we all think in that way, where we feel responsible for one another, imagine the kind of world we would have. And on top of that, having women leadership, which we definitely should be more women leadership in all of the different areas. And so all of these things are so at our service to learn from when we look at history, right? But if we're constantly repeating things and we're seeing things that are just horrific in the world, it's really a really, really, really sad thing to see. And my own thing for you, all of you, if nothing else, is to you feel in your heart Do you feel something for these people? I hope we feel. Because if we feel, that means we're still in touch with our humanity. And it doesn't matter where they're from. It's the humanity that we have to fight for. And if our democracy is not doing that and is countering that, then we need to speak up.
I am my brothers, and I am Mrs. Breakever. Yeah. No?
I think that the most basic human value must be empathy. How is someone else experiencing what they are going through? Another way of saying that is love for humanity. In our tradition, it even says, "V'ahavta et hager," you should love the stranger in your midst. That's the third love in the Torah. Love of God, love of neighbor, and love of stranger. And we probably could have differences of opinions about historical analogies, but we hopefully will not have differences of opinion about empathy and being concerned for the innocents in every situation. Back to the young lady's question about democracy and faith. How democracy is imperfect, and to paraphrase, it's the least imperfect of all forms of government. And I'll take democracy over all other forms any day. And certainly democracy has been better for religion and religious expression here in the United States. But democracy functions on majority rule. But that doesn't mean the majority is always right. Majority can sometimes be wrong because they're not fulfilling their ethical responsibility. And I think that that's a moment that all of us are concerned today, not only here in America, but across the world, whether our democratic values are being fully expressed in their most noble way, in their most ethical way, in their most open way, in their most loving way, in all of its meanings that I referred to a moment ago.
Such wisdom. I'm going to push the envelope just a hair, so we have time for one more question. Would anybody else like to ask a question? Yep, here we are. And, okay.
Thank you all so much for speaking today. But my question is, how do you see Americans integrating if ethnic, multi-faith, actually interacting with other faiths in their daily life?
That's a great question. So when I was working at Multi-Faith Neighbors Network, I put together a program called Inspire, where we brought women in because somehow the main objective of MFNN was to bring clerics together. But whenever you say clergy, it's like 99% men. And so what happens to the women? We're 52% of the population. So I started Inspire to bring women in different cities. I had about 20 WhatsApp groups, one for each city, where I was bringing Jewish, evangelical Christian women and Muslim women together in their respected cities together. And I was giving them allowance for training and having them work together, come together and have those conversations, but also do things that was important for their specific city. Because building relationships is so important in any type of work that you're doing, right? Because if you don't know people, you're not really going to stand up for them. You're not going to advocate for them, and they're not going to do the same thing for you. So it's really important to reach out to people within your area who are of different faith groups, who are of different ethnic backgrounds, and get to know them. I think that's part of what we're missing in a lot of the work that we're trying to do, is to build those relationships. So when these women were coming together, they were learning not just about faith and their belief on certain things, and they disagreed on a lot of different things, but the fact that their humanity was in the room was so important, right? So bringing people together, and you can do this as a college student, you don't need someone else to do it, is to reach out to people in your classroom that are different than you. I'll give you an example of my neighbor. I'm a single mom, so I have 4 kids that I'm raising by myself, and last year I don't know if you guys remember, it was like -7 degrees here in Bulgaria. And the heat went off, the electricity went off, and I'm trying to figure out what am I going to do. And so my neighbor across the street, who is he's a QAnon member, he's very pro-Trump, which is fine. That's his political belief. But he was the one who brought me heaters. He mows my lawn and he shovels my snow. Why? Because I built a relationship with him. I don't agree with him in a lot of things. But the fact that I saw him as a human being and I took him 8 cookies during a holiday, even though my daughter was like, not him, he is not getting one. No, he's the first one who's going to get in. Because it is part of who we're supposed to be as human beings, is to show that as an example. To be the first to reach out. Why are we waiting for everybody else to come to us? Reach out, talk to people, go for a coffee, or, outing somewhere in a bakery, go for lunch, check up on them, right? These are like the small little things that we think are so insignificant, but they're the things that really build relationships. And these are the things that really play a huge role when things go down, is you're going to have your neighbors come for you and you for them when we need to bring our communities together when things are going south. And hopefully that will not happen in this country. And that we can keep our democracy in the way it is, but we can't do it alone. You need to be able to reach out to your neighbors. You need to have a relationship with them. You need to see them as a human being, regardless of their political views, regardless of their religious views. It's important for us to step out of that comfort zone and to be able to connect in a more meaningful way, and then also keep that connection going. And I hope that is something you guys can do here in the college campuses as well. I'm sure you have different faith group, MSAs, and Jewish Student Association. But what do you guys do together? Right?
We're going to let that be the last word. So that's a great place to start that out. Please join me again, and thank you. Thank you all so much for coming. We're grateful to have you here.